All right, it's Adam here at Kingdom Bound again, on location, Backstage Access with Eli and Ryan from the City Harmonic, and we're just talking relationship between front of house and the stage, obviously being the front man, the relationship that kind of happens. So let's just break this down a little bit. How long, Ryan, have you guys been together? How long have you been with City Harmonic?
Ryan's been with us since the beginning, pretty much.
Right.
Our third or fourth show in the U.S., we brought Ryan along and we didn't let him leave. We made him sign with blood.
Yeah, you're committed.
What actually happened is this is the longest 2 weeks of my life. They asked me to come up for 2 weeks, help them get their production in order, and almost 4 years later, I'm still here.
4 years,
yeah. Just about, yeah.
Yeah, and so you guys just kind of grew together.
Yeah,
kind of figured it all out.
Well, and it became obvious to us that having a guy who really knew the songs, knew the moments, knew the sort of intent and what we were going to do, and got to know the sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, show really well, was essential for us. It was sort of like a hidden member of the band, I guess, in highlighting the right things at the right time.
So let's talk about the relationship. Like, so you, obviously what you guys do, you have a sound, you have a focus, the things you're trying to create. How does that work with front of house then? So let's talk about that dynamic and how much trust goes into what Ryan's doing backstage, front of house, versus what you're trying to create as an artist. What's the relationship? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, for us, we put a lot of thought into the, I guess, storytelling of the show, trying to highlight the right things at the right times, and create a certain kind of moment that, knowing where to direct your attention. And while some front of house guys might pick that up, there's a lot going into talking about it ahead of time and planning that sort of thing, but then also Ryan knowing over time, okay, this thing's going to happen at this time. I gotta, Aaron, our guitar player, is going to step forward at this time to play this part. And even though it might not be the most balanced sounding mix, the right thing to do for experience is to bump that up just a little bit. And so he figures all those things out, and then it becomes like a big part of everyone knowing what's going on and understanding and experiencing that thing together, to the point where there was one point where we started doing something and we couldn't get the right signal out of the drum we were using to do it. And it got to the point where for like several months, Ryan started to, and the drummer knew it, I didn't know this, started to get his iPad out and plug in a sample that he would trigger in sync with the drummer from front of house that no one knew. No one in the crowd, we didn't even know this was happening, but this little segment of the set worked out great every time, because Ryan was there timing his iPad to our drummer hitting this thing. Right. So it's just kind of that kind of like give and take thing becomes pretty essential but a lot of that stems from working together a lot,
Yeah. So how much conversation goes into the planning of a show where the two of you guys would talk? Is that you would plan that and then you would then divide that down or kind of talk that out? Or you guys, is it kind of a collaboration?
It's pretty open conversation, I'd say. Yeah, either just during shows in the green room or on the bus or whatever, just kind of talk about what we're going to do next. And I would say we talk more about overall tours, just kind of the image and the atmosphere that we want to create in that evening than just a one-off show. But we're pretty intentional, like Eli said, just about really creating the moments, the correct atmosphere, just the right feel and mood of our events, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you work it out? So let's say because you guys tour a lot, obviously that's sort of your main gig right now. You get into a venue, it's not maybe the most ideal venue, which I'm sure has happened maybe once or twice.
A few times.
And so what's the process of the two of you guys say, let's work together, how are we trying to get the result we're looking for within this venue, maybe this console or this system that we're not really familiar with or really even like or whatever.
Well, and that's where the trust kicks in for us. I mean, now, and it wasn't necessarily this way the first year, we were more hands-on with a lot of that. For sure. But now, like Ryan and Steve, our sort of tour manager, other kind of tech guy, I mean, for the most part, by showtime, if there's not a big decision to be made, we just trust they'll be fine.
So that's the trust that they're going to take care of it.
I was just going to say, a lot of that stuff we haven't talked about for over 2 years. It's kind of just like they'll walk into the venue and they'll kind of look at their back line, and aside from that, they'll kind of leave and just know that everything's going to be taken care of. And that's my job at the end of the day. My job is to be able to do everything that's needed to be done so he can perform.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there certain things that you travel with that these are essential elements to what we create, to what we do, that you just carry? So from a gear perspective?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we actually carry our own in-ear monitoring system everywhere we go, to every single festival, every single one off our tour.
And all the mixes are pre-saved.
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't even have a guy who dials it It's set up. We have our own snake.
Yeah, and
So we just know it's going to be the same every night. And if it's a different kind of room, we tinker a little bit with the mix, but that's it.
we carry our own mics as well. So right from the starting point, it's the exact same mic through the same mixer. So it's a consistent mix every single night for them. We're not wasting time trying to dial in your mixes, and because as performers, they need to be able to hear what they need to hear to make it happen. So it can be very stressful on them if they're not, at the very beginning of the show, if something's off in their mix, it's going to set them off for the whole night, right? They're always going to be thinking about that, and so we just try and keep it as consistent and perfect as possible.
When it comes to mic choice, is it a partnership? Do you guys work it out together, or is it more, do you just trust Ryan with that, or you have a preference of what you like to sing into?
I mean,
what sounds good to you?
There's basically 2 mics that I would mostly use and be okay with. And like obviously there's the Sennheiser 9 series. What do we have right now? A 9?
You're on a 945 right now. So he was on a 965 when we started, and just kind of what we figured out was that a 965 was just too open. Our piano's right in the middle of the stage, and drums are just kind of offset, so the ride cymbal just bleeds into the piano mic like crazy. So I put him on a little bit of a tighter pattern, and it's helped us out quite a bit. So
Ryan, when you talk about the relationship with him, what are some of the things that, from a front of house perspective, so from your experience, but also something you could encourage other front of house engineers to understand? What's the big thing you have to understand in your role by working with the people on the stage? What's some of the things you have to process through?
Like we were just touching on earlier, just really knowing the show. Like you said, there's different moments that happen, and they highlight them on stage by moving in certain directions. And like you said, Aaron will come forward when it's his time, and just knowing the show and moving moving faders around as they have to be moved.
From your experience of working in church, you've been in the church world, how much time do you see generally at front of house engineers are actually going through the song list and getting to know the songs, or are they just kind of generally, I mean, I know this is a very generalization, I get this, so, but are most of them showing up and just kind of winging it, or how many of them do you feel really know what's going on?
I would say it's pretty much set it and forget it. I mean, a lot of guys will just turn on the console, the same status it was in last week, even though there might be a different vocalist, which would take a different compression ratio or a different EQ curve to their mic. They might just leave it and kind of set the faders and sit there. And like you mentioned, the set list, I haven't really seen anybody do that, to be honest with you.
Right. So understanding what you're trying to accomplish, so you're part of the team and knowing the show. And and then from your vantage point, what from someone on the stage who's a singer, you said you worked in a church, what are some of the non-essentials? Like, I just need this guy to understand this, and this is something I really expect from this guy, but also what I need to give to him. What do I need to do in order to make that person succeed? Right.
Well, we've done a few things as a band that because we had been around the block before, and knowing sort of, half of us had mixed before, so it was sort of, for us, helpful to go in and go, okay, no wedges, ever. We never have wedges on the stage, ever. And at our amp level, he has small combos, and that's partly tone and preference, but, we sort of just have done things so that our stage volume isn't super loud, or at least it's very organized. I think it's, and even just musically, trying to make sure that we're sort of landing in things that make his job that much easier. And it's more pleasurable to listen to when you know what's happening. And for him, it's easier to make it sound amazing if he knows what he's got is coming in the right area.
So you're talking a level of trust, right? That has to be established.
Absolutely. Just even down to the small things, like he was mentioning the combo guitars. Like, if we're in a smaller venue and I say to Aaron, like, hey man, your guitar amps are just a little bit too loud, like, he'll turn them down, and I know that trust that he's not just gonna go back to it and turn it up when I'm not looking. You know what I mean?
I'm turning it down.
Exactly. I've always got a fake fader out front of house just for that reason.
And there's a lot of self-control too, where, like our drummer, for example, this happens all the time. We don't like drum shields. We don't use drum shields. Fight them like the devil. But with that said, if Josh has got to play his hi-hat, his overheads lower, he does. It might feel silly, but it's just what's got to happen, Because the overall feel in a room is drastically different versus having a shield in front of you. And I realize some churches have to. But for us, we fight against that and would rather use self-control than squash everything in a tiny plexiglass box.
People aren't going to notice that Aaron's guitars aren't as loud as he'd want them, or Josh isn't following through as heavy as he'd like to. But they're going to notice if the mix is terrible and all they hear is a washy cymbal and feedback, right?
That's great. Hey guys, well, thanks so much for taking the time. We're going to talk Ryan more in a second here, but Eli, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, man.
Hang out with us and just chat, and really appreciate it.
Great.
All right.